This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about third declension. Now, third declension is probably the most complicated chapter that we're going to cover this particular semester. That being said, it's still not that hard, and it's not a whole lot different than the material that we've already covered. The biggest thing that's different is you have to understand a little bit about what happens with the actual letters in the third declension. But if you have a pretty good handle on what happens with the letters, it's really not that much different than the stuff we've already done. It's basically memorizing this, figuring out what the stem is, and then memorizing the endings. That's basically all that the third declension has that's different. The main thing is figuring out the stem is slightly more complicated than it is in the first declension or the second declension, but it's not that much different. So in the third declension, you can see here that Mouse has listed some of the hints. The main hints are related to what you need to memorize, okay? Or I say memorize, as long as you understand this. When you look for the stem, what you're going to be memorizing is the genitive form along with the nominative lexical form that we normally memorize. You can see here, hold up. Okay. You see here, we have the lexical form here, which is sarx. Whenever you do the vocabulary, you're going to notice that there's also a second form next to it. In this case, it's sarcos. The reason that's important. James. Okay. The reason that's important is the way that you're going to be able to figure out what the stem is based on the genitive form, not based upon the nominative form. So whenever you memorize the genitive form, you're going to see that if you drop the ending of the genitive form, which we're going to learn later, you're going to be left with the stem. Basically the same as what we did with first and second. The difference is that it's based on the genitive, not based on the nominative. A couple other things that they point out. If you look at the nominative singular and the dative plural, they're going to look fairly similar with basically an iota added to the end. A couple other kind of rules that you have to remember is these two here. A nu drops out before a sigma, and a ta drops out when it's followed by a sigma towards the end of the word. So onomat becomes onema or onomasi. So onomat is going to be our stem, but because in this case it has no letter after, it drops off. In this case, because there's a sigma that's part of the root, or sorry, part of the ending, it also drops off. Okay? Any questions on those so far? If I was going to memorize one slide, it would be the endings that we're going to go over earlier, or go over later. If you were going to memorize two slides, it would be that one and this one. Okay. So you can see here, I went over this with the Woodbury group a little bit when I was there, that one of the things that's going to happen is you're going to have a degree of something called collision or contraction, where you're going to have two things come together and they're going to end up forming a new form. Okay? The biggest issue is going to be related to the nominative form because this is the form that we normally memorize, the nominative form looks different than the other forms. For whatever reason, it likes James's voice better with the microphone. So I'm going to try to change it up. Okay. So whenever you look at these different forms, what it's demonstrating here is the third declension nominative, the third declension genitive, third declension dative, third declension accusative. Here we have third declension plural nominative, genitive, dative, and accusative. And I taught the group last week that the way that I learned to remember this, so this is for masculine or feminine third declension. Okay, masculine or feminine third declension. The way that I remembered this first grouping, so for the singular, I remembered the word saucia. And that's got your ending there. Saucia. Okay. For the plurals, it was oncius. Oncius. And it always stuck with me. I found these endings a little bit harder to memorize than the ones that were in the first and second declension. I don't know, for whatever reason, the first and second declension just stuck more easily. This is how I managed to keep up with it. Okay. Now, one difference that you're going to notice is that there are three main types of stems, which is a little bit different. So you're going to have mott stems, you're going to have kappa stems, and you're going to have nu stems. These are the three kind of main ones. There are several other ones that we're going to get to, but these are ones that are seem to be more common. Mott stems tend to be neuter. It's not always true, but they tend to be neuter. The other ones are going to be more based on memorizing. Okay. Anybody remember what this word means?
One.
Anybody remember the funny story I told about this? So I was taking my final for Greek 2, and one of the parsing questions was this word. Anyone want to guess what I did wrong? The answer here to this is feminine, singular, accusative. What I put was feminine, plural, accusative. So I did get partial credit. But anybody see the irony in my selection?
Yes, but why can't there be ones?
The term ones in Greek is bound up in an adjective.
Yeah, I suppose it would be an adjective.
So like, if you had the good ones, how would you say that?
You'd have to put good in the plural. Agathoi or agathe.
Yeah, if you're saying accusative, it'd be agathos, but it's something like that. Yeah, it'd be agathoi if it was nominative, but you get the idea. Basically, if you want to learn this, you have to more or less memorize the paradigm. You can see some similarities. So here's our Sasia. This sort of follows the first declension, and this one sort of follows the second declension neuter. But you can see it's kind of like it mixes third and second. But you can kind of see how it could be confusing. Really, if you just go by the endings, you could get by with just saying this is third declension, because the third declension neuter, I don't think we've gotten to this yet. The third declension neuter is Aussie. So instead of Sasia, it's just Aussie, because there's no ending in the neuter for the non-neuter accusative. So this leaves us with the master case ending chart. So the master case ending chart covers all the declensions. So far, we've memorized this. What we're adding on now is this. So these are all your singular forms. Singular. Now, when you look at this, what are some things that stand out to you?
The dative, for sure.
So the dative, the ending stays the same. Okay.
Both genders are the same.
The genitives are the same within the third declension.
I have a question, Quentin. In the neuter singular, I guess that's what you have on here. Is that Yoda supposed to be there in the nominative?
Not.
I looked at that and I thought that was like a typo or something. In the book, it shows that it's a nothing there.
It's supposed to be nothing. Probably should email him about that, because these PowerPoints are new. Probably should let him know that. But yes, it's nothing. So if you notice, These are the same. These are the same. Okay, so it's not the same letter, but it is the same pattern. It's a bit of a stretch, but you could say, hey, look, there's a sigma here. There's sigmas here. So that's a bit of a stretch, but it's not something we're completely unused to seeing. And I'll tell you, since we're memorizing the genitive anyway, you're probably going to have this and this already. So it's just a matter of this last part. Any other observations?
You can have a new in the accusative singular.
Yeah. This is usually a movable new, but there are a few times when this does come up. For the alpha, it's alpha new, or with like the consonantal iota that I talked about, I don't know, 3 or 4 classes ago. Sometimes you end up with a new there. Okay, so this is the plural. Now, if you look at this, all the same. Okay, so that one's easy. Now, what about the dative?
How they both have a iota sigma, but it's just flipped in the third declension.
Yep. Now we still follow this rule. And if you notice, plural nominative and plural accusative in the neuter are the same. Remember, in the feminine, it's alpha sigma, and that's exactly what we have here. The epsilon sigma, I couldn't think of any good way to remember and not just memorize it. Anyone see something that I don't?
When I look at, I think about ES being plural rather than just a sigma. I know a sigma would be plural too, like in English, but to me, just ES seems more plural, you know, the epsilon sigma.
Yeah. I guess in my mind, my problem was I never could connect this with this. That was what I had problems doing. But like I said, I just kept my little S-oncius. And I knew that all the endings had 2 letters, and that got me an A in the class. So if you want to try to figure out a connection, it'll probably stick better. But I just used my little mnemonic, and that's how I survived. This is kind of showing this is showing with the consonants. I think it's easier to just look at the endings that we learn because they're more similar to me to just do the regular endings. Some teachers like for people to memorize it with the endings. I personally didn't have as much good luck with that. So if you're going to memorize a third chart, this will be the third chart. Okay. Memorize the gender or the article, especially on the third declension. Okay. The reason you have to memorize the article on the third declension is how do you tell masculine from feminine apart in the first and second declension or neuter?
The article.
Well, first noun rule says what?
Isn't the first rule talking about what it ends in? What the
Yes.
stem ends in?
The first declension words end in
Alpha or eta,
and they're usually,
feminine.
and second declension words end in
Omicron, and third ending consonants.
right. And a second declension masculine word ends in what?
Eta.
Second declension masculine.
Second declension masculine would end in an omicron.
The actual word, not the stem.
A sigma.
Sigma. Second declension neuter end in.
New.
Yes. So what is it that we've changed with the third declension? Some third declension words are going to be masculine and some third declension words are going to be feminine. And they're going to have the same ending. And the only way you're going to be able to tell them apart is the article. That's why he says memorize it. Okay. Second, mot stems are neuter. Almost always. I can't think of any exception. I'll admit that my knowledge of the hapax legomena is pretty poor. For 10 points, anybody know what that word means?
Something to do with word.
Yep. So you got the 15 points. I don't know if this helps anything, but I think this is actually a Latin phrase. I don't think it's Greek. These are words that only appear one time in the Greek New Testament. Okay. If you get confused, you get a sentence, you have a word that you can't quite figure out. If you look at the article is the same for first declension words, second declension words, and third declension words. It's consistent. So if you see, let's do it this way. You see hey, and then something that ends in, and this is actually a key, a C. What is the parsing for that?
Nominative singular feminine.
Yep. So even if you don't know what this third declension word actually is, as long as you have the article, you should be able to parse it. So as long as you have, coming from somebody who may have had to do this on a few tests, if you have the article and some inkling of what the sentence is about, sometimes based on context, you can figure out what the way it's supposed to be translated with just the article and an idea of what the particular thing you're trying to translate is about. Useful for a test, not necessarily useful for translation, but it is something to know. Okay. Now, I talked about this when I was at Woodbury. Voiceless, voiced, and aspirates are not terribly important. The idea behind this is voiceless, you don't have to add extra air, okay? Voiced is something where you use basically your throat, and aspirates use some degree of air from your nose, okay? It's not always true, but that's where these come from. Kind of along those lines, labials are sounds that you make with your lips. Velars are sounds that you make with your palate, and dentals are words that you make by putting your tongue behind your teeth. So if you've never done this before, try to make a duh sound. Duh, duh, and feel what your tongue does. It puts your tongue to basically the roof of your mouth behind your teeth to make that sound. The k sound. This one's less obvious, but you put your tongue to the roof of your mouth to make that sound. The p, b. Those are all the things that use your lips. These are also the things that drive a microphone crazy. There's sometimes called plosives. You pop and make a burst of air whenever you make those sounds. Okay? So, what he's wanting to show here is P plus sigma equals psi. Beta plus sigma equals psi. Phi plus sigma equals psi. Kappa plus sigma equals xi. Same is true for gamma and chi. Tau plus sigma, delta plus sigma, and theta plus sigma all leave you with just sigma. The sounds from before drop out. Okay? We talked about this before, but he's got it labeled here as a noun rule. A ta cannot stand at the end of a word and will drop off. So animat becomes anima. And if you have, so anima, this is the lexical form, but the genitive form is animatas. So one of my teachers said you always have to have a vowel between a ta and a sigma. And that, for whatever reason, that stuck with me. So the way you get from here to here is based on this. And the reason why anima is the lexical is working backward from this. So if we took away this is our stem, right? Now, if you remember our rule, mot words are neuter, okay? So they have no ending in the nominative and the accusative. So we're left with animat here. It has no ending. The ta can't stand at the end, so it drops out. That's how we get anima. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yes.
Make sense to everybody else?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Because here's the thing. People see the lexical form and they ask, how do we get from this to this? That's not really what's going on here. You have the stem And because of the stem rules, you get to this. If you start with the stem instead of starting with the lexical form, it's easier to understand how these third declension ones form. Okay. This is pos. What does the word pos mean? Does anybody know?
Each, every, all.
So you may notice the pattern here is just a little different. So it's an adjective. And you notice here, you've got our saucia. Here you've got our Aussie with nothing here. But whenever you look at the feminine, you've got ace, a, on. Okay? So you have a third declension in the masculine. You have a third declension neuter. But whenever you get to the feminine, it follows the the first declension. Okay? And that continues through the plurals. The reason that this becomes important and something you need to keep up with, it is pos logos. It isn't this type of spelling of pos. Okay? Even though they don't match in endings, this is the nominative singular masculine form of pos. When you get into the first declension feminine, if this is modifying a feminine word, it's still going to follow the first declension rules. And I will tell you that most of the adjectives that we've learned so far follow what's called the 2-1-2 pattern, which is the regular pattern that we've learned so far. And that doesn't change if it's modifying a third declension word. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yes.
Okay. And kind of a, once again, going back to helpful hints, if you can parse an adjective that you know has to be modifying a word that you don't know it's parsing, you can figure out its parsing based on the adjectives around it. Okay. So continuing that, you've got your esoncios and your ioncia, but you follow the traditional ion, ice, os, leaving you with the 3-1-3. So you got here the different categories. You've got the 2-1-2, the 3-1-3. You also have something called a 2-2, which would be similar to being undeclinable. You also have a 3-3, which is similar. It's going to act as if it doesn't have any particular declension whenever it's being used. These do still agree in case number and gender. It's a little bit more complicated. But basically, if you see that they agree in number or in case and number, you can make the assumption that they agree in gender also. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but for a way to memorize it or understand how things are being used, that's the simplest way to think about it. All right. So this is going through some things that the article can do that we don't necessarily think about. You notice how I normally refer to ha as the article, and I don't usually say it's the equivalent to the. The reason why is this. So you can see here, Mouse describes it as the weak demonstrative. So it can mean that. It can mean who, and it actually can mean he, she, it, all those sort of things too. These are usually things based on context that you're going to figure out, that you're going to have sort of a hanging article where it doesn't look like it goes with any particular word. If I remember right, Paul does this a lot in Ephesians, in those 2 long sentences that he uses to introduce the book in chapter 1. If I remember right, there's a couple times where he does this, where he just uses the article. And in that case, if I remember right, usually, I think most translations translate it as one. It can sort of have, this is along with the he, she, it idea. This is not going to be something that usually is going to be obvious. It's going to be something that you figure out as you're translating the sentence. Okay. So, kind of the concluding things. Stems in a consonant are third declension. That's pretty simple. Stem shows, the stem shows in the genitive singular. That's going back to what we were showing before, is that if you have a word, if you know what the genitive is, you leave off the omicron sigma, what you're going to be left with is the stem. The nominative singular and the dative plural are going to be the forms that are different. And then the nu and the ta drop off before a sigma, and a ta just drops off at the end of any word. Memorize the article for gender. Memorize the master case ending chart. Then for the square of stops, this thing, I don't really care much about that part or that part. I just need you to know that whenever you do add the sigma to these, you get that. Because I'm never going to ask you to reproduce it. The article before de is going to be one of the times where you see this. So this is an example of where it can be he. And then it is helpful to memorize the pos paradigm because it basically will teach you the paradigm for the third declension. Okay. Any questions before we go to the vocabulary? Anything?
No.
All right. Any questions from Woodbury?
No, we're good right now.
Any questions that you think the people who aren't there might have? Anything that's been brought up during the week that may be helpful?
Nothing that I recall offhand that we went over.
That works. All right, so the vocabulary for this chapter, not terribly hard. Anybody know what hagios means without me telling you?
Son,
Holy?
Bios. Holy. Anybody know what happens if this word is used in the plural?
Saints?
Yeah. If you use this word in the plural, it's the word for saints. So if in the singular and as an adjective, it means holy. And if you use it in the plural, it's kind of used as a collective term for saints. A means if. A may. If you take those two words, it means if and not. Usually this word is translated except. Haste, we already talked about. Haste means one. A day. Let's see. Okay. I learned it as already, but he has now as the first definition. Either one of those is going to work, but now already indicates something that's currently happening. Anima means name. It can also mean reputation. It can also mean title. Udes, Udemia, Uden. So I think we learned this word whenever we were going through all the vocabulary. So you got the U, then you got the ace. So this actually comes from a combination of U plus ace. So you put those together and you get no one, or sometimes nothing. Pos, as we talked about before, means each, every, in the plural, all. Peri. So peri is another one of our, I'll write this one down. Peri is another one of our prepositions. So with the genitive, we usually use about. He adds, it can also mean concerning. And with the accusative, it means around. So this is where we get the term perimeter from. Sarx. I would say the best way to learn this word is it's flesh. It can mean body. This is the word that we get sarcophagus from. If you remember, one of the big controversies in the 1984 NIV, they translated this term as sinful nature, and that was one of the big controversies surrounding the NIV. Flesh, I think, is more representative of what the word means. Sinful nature, I think, is more of an interpretation than a translation. Soon. Soon is the, it always takes the dative, and it means with. So whenever you see a word with an SYN prefix, that's where this came from. So like a synonym is a word with the same definition, with the same nym, same word. Soma. Soma also means body. Whenever you think of something like a psychosomatic disorder, that's where that comes from. There is a little bit of a distinction made, at least in Paul, between the difference between soma and sarx. This isn't always true, but sort of as a general rule, sarx is something negative. Okay, soma is not necessarily good, but sarx is usually negative. Teknon. Teknon is the word for child. And this is usually a more of a generic term. There's different words for child. This is the most generic one, I guess would be the best way to say that. So a good example is teknia. Anybody know the difference between teknon and teknia?
Is it referring to natural gender?
No.
Or totally different word?
This is John's term that he uses in 1 John a few times. This is a little child or little children. So whenever you see in 1 John, there's a few places where he uses this term. He refers to the people he's writing to as his little children. And it's not saying babies, but it does imply almost like toddler, people that can't take care of themselves. And that's how John addresses his audience there in his letter. Okay. Tis and ti. And what's specific about this? Anybody remember this? This was one of our vocabulary from the first semester.
The accent?
Yes, the accent. So this one is who, what, which. And I said the kind of the term to put all these together is this is the interrogative. Okay. This does not have an accent. So this is the indefinite article. So this is a certain thing, anyone, anything, or someone, something. Okay, so it refers to something specific, but it is not referring to it by name necessarily. Okay. So like when you read in Mark, a certain man, that's this term. Okay. Any questions about the vocabulary? Okay. So for next week, we're going to do primarily parsing. We're going to do all of the parsing from the workbook. And then we're going to do a few of the translations. The following week, we're going to work our way through some more translations. Does anyone not have a copy of the workbook? I have some extras. Gregory, do you have a copy of the workbook?
Yeah.
Okay. Bros, do you guys have a copy of the workbook?
Yes.
Okay. I guess I got extras. So I would go ahead and work on all the parsing. Once you get the parsing done, start working on the sentences and try to get as many done as you can. We'll come back next week. We're going to run through the paradigm a couple times. We're going to write it out a couple times. We're going to say it a couple times, and then we'll do the parsing. Any other questions? Okay.